Hi, YouTube. I wasn't going to comment on the Paris attacks, but there are a few things that I do want to address, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. The main reason that I'm going to is because of a lot of things that I see repeated in the media over and over and over again, and they cause me a little bit of concern. Also, an address by Russell Brand from his bedroom. And the concept that's ringing in my mind every time I hear some of these different things reported is naivete. There seems to be plenty of it to go around. I'll start with Russell Brand. He made an address from his bedroom, as he apparently does, and he was talking about how we can avoid these clashes, these terrorist attacks and things like that. And I think there was plenty of naivete in his address. He did talk about some things that I think are key, and I think they are reasonable to discuss, and that is foreign policy as being potentially inciting people to violence. And I think there's some legitimacy to that claim. He was basically saying, we need to stop with our interventionist foreign policies, and everyone on both sides of the aisle, of the fence in these ideological hot wars, basically needs to have more compassion for each other and have, spread the love and that sort of thing. Again, I think there's some legitimacy to the critique of our interventionist foreign policy when our own intelligence agencies have told us about things like blowback, and they've told us that, hey, this is what you get often when you have interventionist foreign policies, especially when you do things that are clearly for your own benefit at the expense of other people, and talk about collateral damage and that sort of thing, when you're actually killing civilians, and you really you create militants, I think, in that regard. So I think there's some legitimacy to that, even if the war hawks disregard their own intelligence agencies when they say that. But I think it's pretty naive to suggest that a militant ideology such as Islam is just going to, think love and puppies when it comes to the people that are laid out in their very documents as legal targets, right? Unbelievers are legal targets. And I'm not talking obviously about a terrestrial law here. I'm talking about their belief in their ideology. And unbelievers are legal targets. That would include Russell Brand, I would have to imagine. And these people are committed. They'll kill themselves in the carrying out of these duties, the duties to kill you as an unbeliever. And so the other thing I think that's a little bit naive, especially when it comes to the refugee crisis, is to not vet people. And even that is problematic because, I hate that word. That word has become tainted to me, and some of you will probably know why. Every time I hear it now, I know, I feel like I know where someone's coming from. I guess I just used it, so maybe that's not the case. But where that's problematic is in when you have an ideology where one of its core principles is that it's okay to cloak yourself. It's okay to cloak yourself as being westernized, so that later on you can sort of awake as a sleeper cell and carry out your duties. And so it's okay to lie. It's okay to pretend that you're going along to get along. And then you can come out later. And I'm not sure enough people are aware of that. That is one of the core tenets of Islam. And I'm not saying, of course, that all people who practice Islam believe in that principle. I'm not sure how and why you wouldn't, if it's part of your foundational documents, how people work themselves, get around that. I'm not sure, but I do recognize that not everyone who practices Islam believes in that. But that does pose a problem for anyone who is trying to vet someone who's coming into your country, whether it's through legal immigration or through part of a refugee crisis. And ISIS themselves, you want to talk about naivete, ISIS themselves warned that they were going to infiltrate the ranks of the refugees with some of their fighters. So it's not like we haven't been warned. Now, also, of course, then that leads me to the naivete of our leaders. The very day of the attack, as everyone knows, President Obama was actually talking about ISIS and said, we have them contained. He also said something about they're not marching across the plains or something like that. Well, I think they are on the march. And so then one would have to say either Barack Obama and all the other Western leaders who said, hey, this doesn't mean we need to change anything to do with our refugee policies. Let's not change anything there. They're either naive or they kind of know that this is going to happen and they're okay with it. Maybe they want domestic crises to happen. I don't know. I'm not suggesting that, but one of those two things I think has to be the case. When it comes to naivete, also, I have to wonder about some of the discussions in the media, because it seems like every news channel that I listen to or watch, left wing, right wing, television, radio, it doesn't seem to matter. Everyone's talking about how this represents a raising of the bar. It's a new level. This is a coordinated attack. This is not lone wolf. This is a complex coordinated attack. And I don't know. I look at it. Maybe it is looking at the enemy, underestimating them highly to think that they are not capable of anything complex and high tech. But they're speaking of this almost as though it is some sort of a high tech complex attack. And I look at it. It doesn't look all that complex to me. First of all, you've got a Eurozone with sort of open border policies. They've already had homegrown terrorists there anyway, so it's not hard to see how people could get there. Probably the most difficult part of this attack was smuggling in the weaponry. And even in an area where, it's a gun-controlled area, I'll bet it wasn't all that difficult. It's just a guess on my part, but I'll bet it wasn't all that hard for them to smuggle in the weaponry. After that, it's just basic planning. You choose a few venues. You maybe check some schedules to see what event might be happening that you want to take advantage of. Synchronizing a few watches, and that's it. This is not a complex attack. And I have to wonder why that is a talking point. If it's an organic thing that just happened and people started parroting it, or what, I don't know. But this was not a complex attack. And I think to call it such, it underestimates, I think, the intellect and the level of our enemies, or it's meant to, I don't know, convey some kind of a message to the populace, and I'm not sure what that would be. No one should be surprised, I don't think, that this attack happened, and I think that anyone who is surprised that this attack happened, in light of everything else that's been happening, is naive, and maybe naive because they haven't been educating themselves. They haven't been watching maybe some alternative media, that they've been buying all the talking points. But I don't think you can smash civilizations together that are so different without some sort of an effort towards vetting people and towards making sure that people ascribe to the principles, the core principles of freedom and democracy that you do. And I think that we're in dangerous territory. And I do agree that I think our foreign policy in the past has been far too interventionist, and we've gone in too much as the cowboy far too many times. We're dealing with the aftermath of that now, and I'm not sure exactly what the answer is. I'm not saying that I have the answer, because I think now you have to deal with the fallout. But I think underestimating the enemy is very naive and very, very dangerous, and that seems to be what's happening. Oh, and one more thing. It seems to me there's a marked difference in the way our leaders respond to these international terrorist attacks and domestic, say, a gun attack where, a lone gunman goes in and kills a half a dozen people. And that strikes me as odd. If you're rationally and empirically trying to get to the root cause of an issue, why you would treat them differently. So, for instance, a lone gunman in the U.S. typically goes and kills a half a dozen people. Often we get a press release by the leadership on the very day of the attack, before even all the facts are in, stating that, we need to tighten up gun control legislation, that guns are the problem. So they've made this, whether, misguided or not, they've made a rational and empirical determination as to the cause of the event, and they want to act accordingly to reduce the possibility of that happening in the future. When it comes to these international terrorist attacks, they seem to have all come out and parroted the same talking point virtually right away, that we don't need to change any of our policies with regards to vetting any of the refugees, the whole refugee policy in the first place. And that strikes me as odd. If you're going to look at it rationally, empirically, you would have to admit that the people who've committed these acts are not traditional Parisians, that they've come from somewhere else, somewhere with a vastly different civilization and potentially some different ideological beliefs, and that those beliefs include, cloaking themselves and assessing you as a target. And again, that's not to even mention the foreign engagements that you're involved in. France is quite heavily involved and engaged in Syria, and so you are potentially creating enemies there, and then you've got an open floodgate for them to come in. And again, I just want to be careful. I'm not saying that all Muslims follow that principle of extending Sharia law to all the non-believing countries that they move to. It's confusing to me, but I recognize that some, just like a lot of Christians don't believe in every particular tenet of Scripture. I recognize that a lot of Muslims don't. However, it's naive to think that some that some wouldn't follow that, because they tell us this. And I have to wonder why it is that someone like my mom, a grandmother, who is a threat to no one, has to be more carefully vetted and searched to go and visit family, to get on an airplane to go visit family, than some people coming from countries that have, that are known to be war-torn, that are known to, induce that kind of demonization of people in the West, and also have an ideological position that's potentially dangerous just because of their beliefs about you, about what they think of you, especially your civilization, the way that women dress and conduct themselves, and, the wretched excess that they see, what they see as practices that are not becoming, and that sort of thing. And this naivete extends itself and is evidenced, I think, again, by the fact that people are calling this some sort of a high-tech, complex attack. And when really, it's nothing of the sort. There are far more complex scenarios in your average video game. So I'd like to know what you think. Thanks for watching.